Hi guys, Black Box here. I've been getting a few requests for another video for a full flight, and so I decided to do a very quick and short flight from Salzburg to Innsbruck in the P3D version of the FSLabs A320. And here we are. We've just arrived at Salzburg. At the present time, the aircraft is being unloaded, and so we have time to prepare for the next flight. The fueling has already been finished, not much fuel required for this short trip. And so let's get into the cockpit. Before we start inputting data into the MCDU, we'll have a look around the cockpit, make sure all the switches and push buttons are in the correct position. Here I'm switching on the ground control switch for the cockpit voice recorder. That way conversations in the cockpit are being recorded on ground when the engines are switched off. So just checking that all the light switches are in the correct position. As you can see, the APU is already running, supplying APU bleed air to the air conditioning packs. Alright, so the electric panel looks good. Everything's normal. Fuel panel, hydraulic panel. All the white lights are out. No fault indications on the right overhead panel. Looking good. Okay, so it's now time to feed the MCDU, and my loyal viewers know I'm using the mnemonic diffrip for this. That way I make sure that I don't forget to put any important data into the MCDU. So first is D, and that stands for data. And on the aircraft status page we check that the active nav database is valid. If it's not, then you should update it. Next letter I stands for init page A, and here we either upload the company route or we have to type in the departure and destination airport ourselves. Then we'll type in our flight number, today Nikki 522, cost index, which is 10, and then the cruising flight level, which is 260. So moving on to the init page B, you don't have to fill this out now. You can also do this after setting the radios. Me personally, I fill out this page immediately, so I get some values regarding the remaining fuel once I've loaded in the flight plan. Since fueling has been finished, we'll have a look at the actual zero fuel weight, which is 58.1 tons. And also that gives us a center of gravity of 26.1. And then we have to make sure that we have the correct block fuel value inserted in the FMS. So today we say it's 3.6 tons. And so that gives us an estimated takeoff weight of 61.5 tons. Now, since in this version you cannot insert the wind data for each waypoint in the flight plan, you have to enter a average trip wind, headwind or tailwind in the init B page. Also make sure that you enter the alternate airport. In this case it's Friedrichshafen, Echo Delta November Yankee, in order to get a correct value for alternate fuel and alternate time. So looking at our OFP, operational flight plan, we can see that we need 788 kilograms of alternate fuel to get to Friedrichshafen. So we'll enter 800 kilograms manually into the correct line select key next to the alternate prompt. So next up is F, which stands for flight plan. Here obviously we have to fill in the departure route, expecting takeoff for runway 15, and according to the flight plan we will be using the RTT 3 Bravo departure. After RTTB it's going to be straight to the arrival, and that's the localizer 26 today with the arrival route RTT 1 Bravo. However, I'm going to put the approach via, in this case, via RTT. That just simply means that after RTT Rattenberg, we'll proceed straight onto the final fix for the localizer 26 approach. Now we'll just quickly check this on our plan page on the navigation display. So I'm just scrolling through the routing now, and there we can see RTT, and then it's straight towards the final course for the localizer approach. So next up is R, and that stands for radios. So according to our departure route, we'll select the necessary nav aids. I know that the RTT 3 Bravo departure is a pure RNAV departure. Nevertheless, for backup reasons, I select certain DMEs and VORs to help me with the navigation. So initial altitude is 10,000 feet, which is already set in the FCU. So now the load sheet has arrived, and we have to recheck on the init.b page the actual weight data. Now luckily no changes, so the actual zero fuel weight is the same as on the flight plan. Alright, loading and boarding is almost finished, and so it's time to prepare the takeoff performance data. For this I'm using the TopCat software. So I've already done the calculations for 61.7 tons, and air conditioning is off, anti-ice is off, using runway 15. So I've decided to use flaps 1 with flex 62, which will give me a stop margin of 535 meters for runway 15. Corresponding speeds are 142, 142, and also V2 is 142. Transition is pretty high at 10,000 feet, and for Salzburg we'll be using the NADP2 procedure. That simply means that the thrust reduction and the speed acceleration phase begins at 1,000 feet height. The engine out acceleration is typically 1,500 feet height, so in this case 3,000 feet baro indication, because Salzburg is at about 1,410 feet mean sea level. Now, last thing missing is the trimmable horizontal stabilizer trim setting. This can be done as follows. you just select the payload page. You look at the Takeoff CG, which is 26.3, and then you go to the trim wheel next to the thrust levers, where you'll find two indications. An outer indication showing you the center of gravity, and then right next to it the trim setting itself. So for 26.3 we get a nose up trim of about 0.4 units. So we'll type up 0.4, insert this next to the flap setting, and there you have it. Now the performance page is complete. And just in time, because the doors are closing, and so we can get ready for the final preparations. But before we get the engines started, we have to do our pre-departure briefing. So first off, we can say that the aircraft's technical status is perfect, no major issues, and also the status page is clear. We've ordered 3.6 tons, which have been delivered and equally distributed in the tanks. And so from a zero fuel weight of 58.1 tons, we get to a takeoff weight of about 61.5 tons. So we have an extra time available of 15 minutes, equaling about 700 kilograms of fuel. So we get to the performance data page. We selected 62 flex temperature, flaps 1, speeds 142, 142, 142, transition 10,000 and NADP 2. Also engine out acceleration is 3,000 feet. Now we've been preparing the departure route Rattenberg 3 Bravo. And as I've said before, it's an RNAV coded departure, so leading us via the waypoints Whiskey Sierra 633, 610, 616, 617, and then to Rattenberg. Initial climb altitude is 10,000 feet. Even though it's an RNAV departure, we have decided to select some radios. On VR1 we have Salzburg, and on the ADF we have Sierra India beacon. So received our clearance and selecting the Squawk 5522. Switching on the beacon, APU bleed is available. And so we are ready for the before start checklist. So before start checklist, cockpit prep has been completed. Signs are on auto. Fuel quantity 3,620 kilograms. Altimeters 1020 is set, indicating 1,440 feet. Below the line, windows doors are closed, beacon is on, thrust levers idle, and parking brake is on. Before start checklist completed.
Hello, Captain. We are ready for pushback. Departure check completed. Flight has been inserted. Release parking brake.
Parking brake released.
All engines clear. Start that wheel.
Engine start. Engine number 2 start. So we'll check that the start valve has opened. We have beginning and 2 rotation. Right, you can see ignition A has set in at about 24%, and 2 will get fuel flow. And shortly after that, DGT, the exhaust gas temperature should be rising. At about 48% N2, the ignition switched off and the start valve closes. As soon as the start valve closes, you can start engine number 1. Engine electric generator has taken over power now, and the engine is available. So after start flow, engine mode selector norm, APU bleed off, APU switch off, arming the spoilers, selecting flaps 1, and then doing the flight control check. So we have full left, full right, elevator full down, and elevator full up, neutral, rudder full left, full right, neutral. After start checklist. After start, engine anti-ice is off. ECAM status checked. And trim. 0.4 up set. And 0. After start checklist completed. Alright, let's taxi to the runway. When you start taxiing, make sure that you have a maximum of 30% N1 in order to avoid jet blast. Then we'll do the brake check. So a few more things to do. The outer brake max, and then do the takeoff config test. You can see I forgot to switch on the predictive wind shear, and now it's all good. So before takeoff checklist. Flight controls checked. Flap setting 1 plus F. Takeoff speeds flex 142, 142, 142, and flex is 62. ECA memo. Takeoff no blue. That's the before takeoff down to the line. So just receiving our takeoff clearance. Switching on landing lights, nose glide to takeoff position, and switching on strobe lights. So reading before takeoff checklist below the line. Takeoff runway 15 full length, and the packs are off. Before takeoff checklist completed. Alright, cleared for takeoff. So first we're selecting about 50%, let the engines stabilize, make sure they spool up at the same rate. Right, stabilized, and now setting flex power. On the FMA we read man flex 62, SAS runway and auto thrust blue, and takeoff thrust set. .100 knots checked.
V1.
Rotate. Positive climb, gear up. Passing 1000 feet height, we're selecting climb power, so thrust climb, climb, alt, blue, auto thrust. After setting climb power, we switch on pack number 1. Wait a few seconds before we switch on pack number 2. Alright, I'm selecting speed here at S speed to help with the tight turn. Reaching S speed, accelerating, flap 0. Once the flaps are 0, we're gonna disarm the spoilers and switch off the turn-off and the nose gear lights. Passing transition altitude 10,000 feet, selecting standard. And now it's time to switch off the landing lights and release the cabin. In case you're wondering what the outer tank fuel transfer message means, it just means that the transfer valves have opened in the fuel tanks, allowing fuel from the outer wing tank to transfer to the inner part of the wing tank. So as mentioned before, pretty short flight today, only about 65-70 miles to go until we reach Innsbruck. Since we don't have much time, let's start with the preparations, selecting some nav aids. For one, we need the Rattenberg NDB. And we can see that the localizer frequency Oscar Echo Victor is pre-selected. Let's have a look at the approach procedure localizer DME 26. See that after Rattenberg we'll proceed on track 210 to intercept the localizer 26, which has an inbound course of 255 degrees. The descent point is at 19 DME. We have a profile of 3.77 degrees, so a bit steeper than usual. The final altitude is at 9 DME from the ILS localizer at 5,500 feet, and the minimum is 3,400 feet. Runway length is 1,940 meters and will be requiring about 1,500 meters. For that we'll be selecting outer brake medium later on, and in case of missed approach proceeding 1 mile from Oscar Echo Victor, then a left turn, intercept QDM 060 back to Alpha Bravo, and then we'll be going the localizer 075 degrees outbound until 14 DME and then direct to Rattenberg. So also we have to insert the weather data into the FMS. QNH is 1020. Outside temperature 19 degrees and the wind is light and variable 2 knots. We'll be doing a config full approach and the minimum is 3,400 feet. So now that the preparations have been completed, approach checklist briefing is confirmed and the MDA is 3,400 feet. Now we're descending to 9,500 feet on QNH 1020. Just about to enter the clouds, checking the total air temperature is at plus 13 degrees, so no need to switch on the engine anti-ice. If total air temperature is below plus 10 degrees Celsius and you're flying through clouds or through precipitation, then you would need to switch on engine anti-ice. Overhead Rattenberg, and we have 1,000 feet to level off. Below 10,000 feet, we're going to reduce the speed to 250 knots. Now, by looking outside the window, we can see lots of high mountains, and we are below minimum sector altitude at 9,500 feet. But since we are on the arrival route from Rattenberg to the final, we can descend and maintain 9,500 feet. Since we are approaching the localizer, I'm going to reduce speed further to minimum clean. And we have lock star. Below 230 knots, we can select flaps 1. One mile to go to the descent point, and so I'm selecting track FPA, selecting higher altitude to be able to descend, and pre-selecting the flight path angle of 3.7 or let's say 3.8 degrees and starting the descent. In the FMA you can see flight path angle minus 3.8 degrees. Also I'm selecting flaps 2 to help me slow down the aircraft and also to increase the drag to adapt for the 3.8 degree profile. So what's important now is to make sure we stay on the correct path, and so we have to cross-check the chart altitudes with the remaining DME distance. So at 17 DME we should be at 8,700 feet. And so we can see we're a little bit high in the profile, so we need to adjust the flight path angle to increase the rate of descent. So at 14 DME we should be at 7,500 feet. Now speed is still increasing slightly, so I'm gonna lower the gear to increase the drag and help me reduce the airspeed. Next cross check is at 10 DME and we should be 5,920 feet. So we are just now approaching the correct profile again. Selecting flaps 3. Approaching the final altitude at 9 DME. Crossing altitude should be 5,500 feet, which is correct. And selecting flaps full. One more important thing to do is to set the go-around altitude of 9,500 feet. Next altitude check is at 7 DME, 4,710 feet. Visual contact with the runway. Going to continue manually, autopilot off. I'm gonna have to arm the spoilers, and then we finished our preparations. The tone you're hearing now is the middle marker.
Minimum
Continue. And the landing checklist, we have Ekamimo landing, no blue. Auto thrust off.
$1,000.
Due to the fact that we have a 3.8 degree glide profile, we'll have to maintain a vertical speed of 900 to 1,000 feet a minute.
$500. 400. 300. 200. 100. 50. 40. 30. 20. Retard. 5.
Smooth touchdown, spoilers, reverse green, and we have decel. Below 17 knots, stowing the reversers. So after landing items, we'll select spoilers, reset, flaps 0. Let's start the APU. And here comes the follow me to guide us to the parking spot. Right, remember to turn off the lights so we don't blind the marshaller. Right, setting the parking brake, and the marshaller signals us to shut down the engines. APU is available. Engine 2 and engine 1 shut down. So now we switch off the beacon, switch off the seatbelt signs, and letting in some APU bleed air for the air conditioning. Also switching off transponder and making sure the weather radar system is off. The ground crew is already unloading the aircraft, and so all that's left for us to do is to read the parking checklist. Right, so reading the parking checklist, APU bleed is on, yellow ilic pump is off, engines are off, seatbelts off, parking brake as required, while chocks are in place, so we'll switch it off, and radar predictive wind shear system is also off. Checking the brake temperatures, so yeah, they're pretty hot, so let's turn on the brake fans. So this concludes this video on a full flight from Salzburg to beautiful Innsbruck. I hope you have enjoyed it. If that is the case, I would very much appreciate a thumbs up. Just in case you didn't know, I'm regularly streaming on Twitch. Link is down below. So thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you again soon. Until then, happy landings.